I'll be talking about on the preparation side of what the situation looks like with how we're preparing new teachers to support changing compositions of classrooms. We're seeing more students with learning disabilities in general education now more than ever before. So our work looks at how these teachers are being prepared and what might associate with these teachers feeling stronger abilities to help teach these students and support inclusion. So a little bit of the policy context. We know that accountability-wise, schools and teachers are being held accountable for educating students with disabilities in general. This includes the largest proportion of these students, which is students with specific learning disabilities. And we see this both through IDEA, which has been around for a while, but also through recent reauthorization of No Child Left Behind, which incorporated accountability expectations, and same was true for under ESSA. And just to give you an idea for specifics on how these classrooms are changing, the largest group that has made the transition from special education only classrooms to general education are students with learning disabilities. We've seen this number jump by 68% in 2 decades. And just a reminder, the end goal is that all students with and without learning disabilities are making yearly academic progress, which then raises questions about how general education teachers are being prepared to educate both sets of needs. Policy context for teacher preparation is also looking a bit different. With regards to educating students with learning disabilities, these teachers and their preparation programs are undoubtedly facing pressure to ensure that these students are indeed making adequately yearly progress. And as a result, teacher preparation programs, both through accreditation process and general policy conversations, are at the forefront of ensuring that this preparation is indeed happening. The challenge here, though, is that traditionally in preparation programs, preparation for general education teachers has been seen entirely separately from preparation to teach students with disabilities. And so now programs are having to consolidate and figure out the best ways to incorporate all of this preparation that we know is good teaching for general education teachers. One of the ways California and many other states are proposing to do this is adding additional licensure requirements. The teacher performance assessments in California, edTPA being one of them, have recently gone a lot of traction. They are required at the end of a teacher's preparation process to be passed for them to receive their credential. Briefly, an overview of teacher performance assessments, edTPA in particular. This is a formal standardized assessment that purports to prepare all teacher candidates to be able to lead a classroom from day one. And so these candidates in edTPA's context are uploading videos of their practice and reflecting on their practice and submit this to third-party evaluators. edTPA particularly has certain rubrics that look at preparation for students with learning disabilities. And so that raises our interest here. And then in general, very quickly, how these teacher performance assessments sort of mesh with existing California policy with regards to teacher preparation programs. Teacher preparation programs, their floor mat, so to speak, is the teacher performance expectations. These are a set of standards that the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing has set for all teacher preparation programs and their candidates to meet the different criteria set out by these performance expectations. The idea is that these TPEs also go hand in hand with preparing for teaching performance assessments, which is that summative assessment at the end of the preparation process. And when that may or may not be happening, but this is part of our interest in seeing what factors might indeed be helpful in preparing teachers to support inclusive classrooms. So our study looks at, has looked at 3 primary questions, which is how do pre-service teachers perceive themselves as ready to educate students with learning disabilities in general education? And then once they graduate, do these teachers, what qualities of their preparation program, such as coursework and field work or the performance assessment, do they feel linked to their abilities to educate students with learning disabilities and support general education? And then we're interested also in how these perceptions might differ for elementary versus secondary teachers. I'm going to gloss over this just a little bit, but here's just some background literature for you to look at later if you're interested in what's been done on teacher education specifically for students with learning disabilities, especially, and then more in the domain of teaching performance assessments later on. So I'm going to talk about two studies that we did. Both were at the University of California teacher education programs. 7 campuses overall were included in these studies. The first study was actually a pilot at just one of these campuses. The second study looked at all 7 of these campuses. And our study involved giving a survey to teachers at the end of their preparation programs, and we asked them a slew of questions from their backgrounds in terms of demographics, as well as a series of questions about their preparation in their programs. Just so you have an idea of, UCs do not prepare a vast majority of teachers in California. That is primarily, private preparation programs or the CSUs, but our demographics do look very similar to the California general labor supply of teachers. So here's just an illustration of those similarities in demographics. What we're interested in looking for these teachers is, are they prepared to provide general support for inclusive classrooms? This really gets at this piece of both educating students without disabilities, but also prepared to engage in a variety of tasks that relate to educating students with disabilities, such as using IEPs. And cooperating with special education teachers. The second thing we're interested in is looking at, are they prepared to use specific instructional strategies that we know are helpful for educating students with learning disabilities? Some of the background or the program characteristics, the factors that go into their preparation we surveyed, were looking at the helpfulness of the teaching performance assessment, the alignment of the teaching performance assessment with the rest of the preparation process, their support from their university supervisor, whether they felt that their program was coherent, had a similar goal and vision for teaching and learning, and then their placement expectations. Did it fit with their expectations of what they wanted to see as a full-time teacher or what they had envisioned prior to being placed there? I'll leave this here for anybody who's interested in the statistical analyses, but moving over into the results, to look at that first research question, which as a reminder is, how do these teachers feel? Do they feel prepared to provide general support or use instructional strategies in inclusive classrooms? This is from that second larger study. And we find that in general, in the various questions that really get at the general support to inclusive classrooms, which you can see over there on the right, we find that teachers did feel pretty positive about their abilities to provide general support to inclusive classrooms. There is variation, of course, but a majority of teachers, as you can see, responded with agree, and then followed by strongly agree. The same was also true for using specific instructional strategies for students with learning disabilities. And you can see some of those different activities we asked them if they were prepared to use. So looking at specific to the second research question, which is what factors related to these different domains. So first, with regards to providing general support, we found that teacher candidates who felt that their programs were more coherent, had a consistent vision, used similar language and artifacts across the preparation process, were more likely to feel that they had policy knowledge, so the understanding of IDEA, the ability to use IEPs, provide that general aspect to support to inclusive classrooms. Also in study 1, so this is the pilot study with a smaller sample, we found that those who felt that edTPA or the teaching performance assessment was helpful also believed that they were more prepared to teach and educate students with learning disabilities using specific instructional strategies. When we scaled this up to the larger study, there were some similarities. The first is looking in general, so this providing general support and educating students with learning disabilities. Teachers who, again, felt that their programs were coherent, felt better prepared to support inclusive classrooms and teach using specific instructional strategies. We also found that teachers were more prepared to teach specific instructional strategies if they felt more strongly supported by their university supervisors in their field placement, which we felt made sense because that's where these teachers are learning to actually use these instructional strategies. Now to look at differences between elementary and secondary, we found that all of our results were primarily for elementary teachers. So all of these different characteristics I've talked about, they grew in magnitude when we took a specific focus on just the elementary candidates. And we did not find any association or statistically meaningful relationship between these different factors I've talked about and secondary candidates, which we also feel makes sense, as I'll get to in just a minute. So summarizing the main findings, we found that program coherence matters a lot. It mattered in a lot of the different ways we were looking at this. And this really gets at defining a consistency in exposure to the different ways that the candidates are being prepared in their program. There's some literature cited there if you're interested. We also found some commonalities across helpfulness. So there is this notion that maybe those who have bought into the frameworks of the teaching performance assessments might perceive themselves as being better prepared to use specific instructional strategies. And then finally, the implication for the secondary candidates is, what are we doing to prepare these candidates? It makes sense that our findings are focused on elementary candidates because these are the individuals who will see the same students all day, know the student's name, probably by the second week of school at least, hopefully even sooner, whereas these secondary candidates are going to see potentially hundreds of students in their classrooms. And so thinking about the efficacy of their ways to support students with specific learning disabilities might be a bit more daunting. But I think this tasks us with figuring out, are there ways that we can reassure these candidates in their preparation and efficacy to support these students and inclusion? And then finally, one last note, in thinking about this in the policy context of edTPA and other forms of traction that the state has put a lot of emphasis on, edTPA in particular, and some of the teaching performance assessments are really geared at streamlining the preparation process. Again, I'll go back to these assessments purport to prepare teachers to gain the knowledge and skills that they need from day one in the classroom. And so in some ways, you can see these tools of preparation as potentially trying to increase coherence within a program, add consistency within programs, have faculty and directors of programs speak similar language and use similar artifacts across their courses. And so this sort of, I think, argues we need a better understanding of ways that edTPA in particular may be increasing coherence in programs, or there's some prior research showing it actually is doing quite the opposite. And so this is an area of research that needs to be pursued further. In conclusion, again, I'll just mention there are some clear limitations to this. Those who are interested in the study design can review some of these and certainly ask questions. And I've talked about a few areas that I think are needed for next steps in future research. I want to acknowledge our funding source for this, a very big supporter, CTARN, the California Teacher Education Research and Improvement Network, which is a cross-UC campus collaboration that is doing some great work. So I encourage you to look into CTARN if you aren't unfamiliar with it. Thank you.